Hello, friends, and welcome. We are delighted to have you join us at the BRICS Academic Forum 2021. The panel today is about mobilizing the NDB for financing sustainable development goals. 5 years since the new development bank became operational, and the NDB has made significant investments in sustainable infrastructure and contributed to the global pool of climate finance. Today's session will take stock of the progress that the NDB has made and will try to provide an outline for its investments going forward. The session will lay particular emphasis on how the NDB can catalyze finance from other sources, including sources like the sovereign wealth funds, philanthropic ventures, and other commercial banks. We would also discuss how the bank can become more effective in financing SDGs, particularly in the role that it can play in the post-pandemic world, where emerging and developing nations face capacity constraints, economic downturns, and societal upheavals. I'm going to begin the session by introducing the speakers to you. And then the speakers will have some opening remarks, and then we'll have a round of discussion. Let me first begin by introducing myself. I'm Ila Patnaik. I'm a professor of economics at the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy at New Delhi. We have speakers from all the BRICS countries. Dr. Bauman is a researcher at the Institute of Applied Economic Research in Brazil. Dr. Irina is scientific director, Russian National Committee on BRICS Research. Dr. Yayu is a research fellow and assistant director at the Institute of World Economy Studies in Shanghai, China. Dr. Kanyani is the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Venda in South Africa. And Ms. Pratibha Shaw is from the RIS. I would like to turn first of all to Dr. Bauman. Dr. Bauman, will you please give us your opening remarks? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Since we are concerned about financing SDGs, let me have a close look about the operation of the bank so far. According to the bank's webpage, there have been some 79 projects approved so far, and out of which transportation, SDG 9, industry innovation infrastructure, and energy, SDG 7, affordable energy, together account for about half the number of projects, 49% to be more precise. If we then add sustainable development, which would be SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, that share goes up to 70% of all the projects, which means that there has been a clear focus and sectoral concentration in the projects financed by the bank. This is strictly in line with Article 1 of the agreement of the NDB, which says the bank shall mobilize resources for infrastructure and sustainable development in BRICS and other emerging economies. Now, having said that, the definition of infrastructure can go a deep further than that. It could also comprise health, education, and technology. And when we see that the bank's operations, at least since last year, it has proved to have some flexibility in providing health assistance due to to deal with the COVID pandemic. Some 8 projects have been financed in that area. That would correspond to SDG 3, good health and well-being. But if we take the broader definition of infrastructure, further action by the bank might also comprise projects in SDG 4, quality education, 5, gender equality, and 10, reduced inequality. So I think there is a case in there if we take into account the relative importance of SDGs. Now, having said that, how to finance those projects? Well, natural candidates would be joint projects financed with multilateral, regional, and domestic development banks. That goes without saying. But we also have some new players such as sovereign funds and so on and so forth. But I would end up my initial remarks with three provocations. The first one is that the NDB should try and use its capacity to influence governments to adapt legislation wherever needed, so as to make it attractive for private capital to jointly invest in sustainable long-term projects. Clear case in my country, for instance, in terms of mobilizing private capital for long-term projects. Second provocation is that since the launching of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, there should be a commitment by the European Union to help finance productive adjustment elsewhere. Otherwise, a number of exports from a number of countries would be penalized for the simple fact that a big market has just changed its norms to deal with imports. And third, and not the least, the support to SDGs financing is explicit in the Chinese 14th five-year plan. And then it's a question mark, and how is it going to be operated? Probably it's to be expected that there should be some funds in terms of providing resources to financing clean projects in accordance to the 2030 agenda. These would be my initial remarks, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bauman. Thank you very much. May I now request Dr. Ye, please, can you give your opening remarks?
Thank you, Ila, for your kind introduction. I'm very pleased to participate in this great event. I would like to share my personal observation on the NDB. I think the first point is that it has done a great job in its first 5 years of operation. Just some quick numbers compared with its peer institution in Beijing, the AIIB. We know AIIB is much larger in terms of membership as well as capital, but the NDB has approved more projects than AIIB. By the end of the last year, $24.4 billion of the projects have been approved, which is larger than the AIIB's one. And in terms of the COVID-19 fighting response, I think the NDB is also quicker than the AIIB, and it's actually the fastest MDB in terms of its action. And the NDB is also prominent in many of its operations, like the local currency use, as well as the country system use, and also, as Professor Bauman has mentioned, in the sustainable projects. And I want to focus on the question you raised, how to enhance its mobilization of the other resources or private resources. I think I have 4 points to mention. The first point is that the NDB, I think, should focus on the infrastructure financing for emerging economies, and of course, BRICS countries are those. I said this because the COVID-19 fight is a crisis management. It is actually something that NDB should not do. It's a job of the IMF or the other BRICS countries cooperation mechanism called the CRA, Contingent Reserve Arrangement, which is more about crisis management. So the COVID-19, the crisis management has actually occupied the resources for the long-term infrastructure financing. And the World Bank's report has said that actually the infrastructure financing with the participation of private finance has declined by 52% last year in 2020. So that's the first point. And the second point is that to invest, the BRICS countries should contribute more concessional resources for the NDB to mobilize the others. Because NDB is more like it is more like a commercial bank. It does not have a grant window like the World Bank's IDA, but it does have a project preparation fund, which is a grant for its member countries to improve the project preparation. As I said in the beginning, although the NDB has approved a lot of projects, but its disbursement rate is very low. It's about, if we don't calculate the COVID-19 related projects, the disbursement is only 16%, 16%, which is very low. The reason is that the projects are lack of the preparation at the early stage. So compared on this, I think NDB has done much less than the AIB on the project preparation fund. It has a fund of about $7 million, and only 0.8 million was used. That's the second point. And the third point, I think, is that the NDB could innovate its financial instruments in maximizing its mobilization, like the guarantee, like the equity, all those things, and also investment in the intermediary fund. I think it has already done. And the last point is that the NDB could work more on enhancing coordination with other MDBs, with other sister institutions. This is a controversial one because the NDB, its procurement policy is different from the others. It's not open, it's limited to its member countries. So it restricts its project cooperation, co-financing. But I think on the policy level, the NDB should be much more proactive in working together with others, such as on the private finance mobilization. I know that there's a MDB level, actually a working group, but the NDB is not part of that, led by the IFC. So that's my quick points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, you've raised some very interesting points, and we'll come back to discussing them in greater detail later. May I now request Dr. Kanyani Barwa, please, can you now give your 5-minute opening remarks?
Thank you very much, the moderator, and Dr. Kanyani. I'm actually the Dean of the Faculty of Management, Commerce and Law, not Humanities, but it's fine, at the University of Venda.
Sorry.
Yes. My point of departure is that the NDB is as old as SDGs, which were adopted in 2015, and then and always were embraced in the BRICS summitaries, you know, to respond to the call for a universal call, really, for action to end poverty, protect environment. So all these projects, the infrastructure project of the NDB, responding to SDG, will go a long way in combating the issues of poverty and environment. But at the same time, at the end of the day, we are looking forward for people to enjoy peace and prosperity. But the NDB loans, as we know, is the 2/3 of the NDB's funding infrastructure. They need to be structured and more pronounced, and then the NDB should not find itself falling in the same trap of the Bretton Woods in Africa, where there were structural adjustment programs which dismally failed in the continent. So the current NDB funding model should be complemented significantly, because currently it's constrained but at the same time, it has some backlogs because maybe the private sector is not coming to the party. So we're looking forward for opening up that space so that the multilateral banks, the regional banks and the national banks, together with the private sector, should operate harmoniously in that space. But issues of inflexible lending conditionality of the regional banks or the multilateral banks should be relaxed a bit so that it should harmonize with the protocol of the NDB. So these are the issues that are emerging, and looking critically at the SDGs in particular. I'm looking at the goal number 6, which ensure issues of water. Goal number 6, 7, looking at issues of clean energy and renewable energy, which currently is very expensive, not accessible. And I think focusing on such kind of NDPs will go a long way, but recognizing the disparities of the BRIC countries need to come with their own priorities. For example, in South Africa, prioritizing the rural provinces where to advance rural economy and the township economy. In Russia, perhaps focusing or prioritizing more in the eastern region, and so on and so on. So these are what I see it as very important reprioritization, so that it should be a bottom-up approach, and in a way that this money can be filtered down to the grassroots and transform the lives of the societies in a real time. And in that bottom-up arrangement, so that will be informed by the NDB and the multilateral development banks, so that the NDB should not be criticized to be seen as accelerating economic growth as a proxy for development. We need economic growth, but of course we need development on the ground that is transforming into tangible output. So it is very important, therefore, to cushion that ailing BRICS emerging economy in the manner that is multi-pronged approach. So the NDB funding model must be long-term, and they should take account of the infrastructure and the cost disparities that I've referred to. So in that way, we will be able to come with the long-term impact studies that need to be conducted, so that we can able to check the amount of the work that is translated into investment opportunities out of these funding streams. So the cooperation of the business as well as the civil society need to be properly consulted. Comprehensive consultation with communities and business and civil society is very important, so that their voices can be heard and be packaged in response to the issues of the maintenance of the infrastructure should be looked at, because it's not just coming with the infrastructure that are funded, but the maintenance of this infrastructure is also costly. So we need to catalyze the private sector and the civil society so that we can drive this change. Lastly, from Africa we want a no one left behind adage. For every project, there must be a sensible way of tackling poverty and inequality. And such funded SDG infrastructure project must have a long-lasting human touch and sensitivity. They must not displace people. This infrastructure, they must actually have a human touch of embracing that human and social aspects of life, which is transformative. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Professor Yarygina, may I please request you to give your remarks?
Thank you very much indeed. And let me greet our dear colleagues, all of you, in the name of the Financial University under the government of the Russian Federation, in the name of the MGIMO that is under the Ministry for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. And within these universities and within our national committee, we are doing a lot to contribute to the development in different spheres, and highly appreciate the activity of the New Development Bank. We confess that the activity is very fruitful and useful, and actually we are just on the eve of new projects and further developments, and we would like to suggest some ideas concerning some further trends of the activity of NDB. I'll try and be quick. Next slide, please. We all thinking about the hydrogen future of the economy, and just it's the growth of the population and the growth of the energy consumption and the growth risks of energy security. We understand that oil and gas is not forever. Next slide, please. And that's why we should think about carefully about the usage, the renewable sources of energy, and the hydrogen future of our economy. The next one. And the production, the next slide, please. And the usage requires the harmonization of our relations of our countries and partner countries, because it's just the future of the globe. And every phase of the production of hydrogen and its storage and usage needs financing, mutual financing of our countries in just the period. New Development Bank contributes greatly to the green energy production at the moment, and the future is the usage of low carbon hydrogen and the reduction of the high carbon footprint of supply. We are speaking, the next slide please, about different types of hydrogen. That is the green one, and the New Development Bank is quite active with it at the moment, and other phases concerning the possibility of the financing, the supply of blue hydrogen and brown hydrogen is the future. The next one, please. The next slide. The low carbon supply is very important because it contributes to the environmental protection, to the innovative fuel supply, and it really needs the usage of different financial instruments for production, storage, and shipment. The next one. Within that, the next slide, please. Within that, there are several challenges, not only for New Development Bank, but for partners, the banks for development with participation of our countries within the investment in carbon-free or carbon-neutral hydrogen production technology. And within the transition period, as we have already mentioned, there is a possibility to set up some pilot projects and to study feasible technological solutions. The next one. It's not only, the next slide please, it's not only the activity of the New Development Bank, because it's the huge and multilateral and long-term project. It's the activity and the interest of our governments or all other just types of entities without any reference to any type of their property, whether it's with the governmental participation or not. The most interesting and within the scale of the New Development Bank activity, it's the establishment of consortium for pilot projects that will just afford new jobs creation and sustainable economic development for our countries. Then the scheme, mutual harmonized scheme of renewable energy financing and the acceleration of to ensure the medium and long-term growing of domestic and external demand for green hydrogen. Then it will contribute to the process of the production of green energy and help to just preserve and defend our atmosphere, and will be the new very important trend. The next slide, please, and the last one, for the activity of NDB and its partners for reproduction cycle within the process or just of production, the new type of energy, the storage and the usage in all our country members and all of our entities. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Professor Yarygina. May I now ask Praviva Shaw, please, to present your 5 minutes of opening remarks?
Yeah. Good evening, ma'am. Good evening to all. Thank you for this opportunity. I would like to, in the first opening remarks, I want to present the one of the biggest achievement that the BRICS has done is setting up of NDB, and I wish to highlight their key progress in this, and wish to quote that as NDB is the first introduced sustainable financing policy framework for the ensuring of green, social, and sustainable bonds and other debentures instruments. The achievements as one of my colleagues has already presented, that the loan disbursement is low, quite low. I quote that till now only 6.9 billion has been issued out of 25 billion of 72 projects, and 44% of the COVID emerging loan disbursement goes to the COVID emergent assistance in 2020. But they have done a remarkable job in terms of giving a bank financial commitment to and aligning their project funding to 11 SDG goals out of 17, and the key priority sectors are goals 7, 13, 9, 6, 11 and 4, and the top top 3 sector that the funding goes to SDG 9 on infrastructure funding, that is 33%, and energy, clean energy, and it's to 14%, and urbanization and city development is to 14%. And the lowest funding goes to SDG 2 on health, on SDG 2 on hunger, and education and climate funding. So till the funding is almost less than 3% in these 3 goals, and whatever they quote that the cumulative bank approval for climate financial commitment is only 19%. And in the year NDB has 2020, NDB has cumulatively raised 3.6 billion USD through a bond insurance, including the assurance of green bonds and COVID-19 response bond. And it is there. One of the achievements is it is the first issuers to use the UN SDG standards as well as the SDG financial taxonomy in the debt capital market. And recently in March 2020, they have issued 5 billion RMB SDG bonds to China, and they have initially committed to provide financing in local currency of so out of they have done till to 2 countries, China and South Africa. To China it is 75%, and to South Africa it's almost 27%. And coming up with a quick strategy for diversification, I would propose that they should give consideration to specific country needs and circumstances of the economy, such as that every country has a different level of development or for capital market. And national development banks should use credit enhancement mechanism. There is a need for strengthening in enabling conditions like planning tools and resources to improve capacity to develop projects from some conceptions to financing to provide viability of projects. And in this regard, I'll propose quick recommendations that they should look forward into in terms of supporting and improving access to concessional financing and other financial measures to health, food security, and education in infrastructure and progress towards sustainable development. And since the social infrastructure is vital for human development as well as economic development, there is a need for the convergence between the physical and social infrastructure for inclusive development. And also, NDB should focus on fostering sustainable and equitable growth through diversified fund based on the priority lending as per the country's need, and enhance the ecosystem for SMEs funding and to scale up and provide and sustainable and resilient infrastructure. And the last point that I want to raise is to comprehensive strategy should be prepared on supporting its member country transition towards low emissions and climate resilient infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pratibha, and thanks to all the speakers for their initial comments. Now, just turning to what are some of the challenges ahead from NDB for NDB. One of the biggest challenges is that increasingly infrastructure needs to be financed by the private sector. So particularly if you look at some of the emerging economies, including some of the member countries like ours, then while NDB has been in its initial years, it's mainly catered to government and state-owned enterprises and lent to governments and state-owned enterprises. But given that infrastructure needs are very high, government resources are limited. They were already limited, but after COVID, government resources are even more limited, and that private players will be involved in a lot of the construction of infrastructure. One of NDB's strategies looking forward is for enhanced lending to the private sector. What are some of the challenges that you see in trying to do that? If we could please start with Dr. Bauman and what your views on this are. Dr. Bauman.
To start with, there are some estimates that worldwide, until 2030, the excess demand for financing projects in infrastructure goes up to about 60 trillion US dollars. There's no institution in the planet that is able to finance all that. That's to start with. Hence, in accordance to your point, there should be a more intense mobilization of private capital. Now, having said that, two constraints, or three constraints, so to speak. One is the lack of good projects. The more intense use of project financing, elaboration of the projects, as said by our Chinese colleague, is very much in line. Second, in some economies, as in Brazil, the very lack of an institution to provide guarantees. And that's one of the big shortcomings to attract private capital. If you are a medium or small company, it's very hard for you to have assets enough so as to provide guarantees, even more so if we are talking of a long-term project. And third, the perspective with regard to exchange rates. If we are talking of a project where the outcome or the remuneration of the investment is done in domestic currency, then you have to adapt that to US dollars or more stronger currency. If you are not US or if you are not one of the countries with a strong currency, then you have this mismatch of exchange rates in a long-term period. So I think these are the three main constraints in terms of mobilizing private capital for providing assurance that the equity will be rewarded in a sustainable and acceptable way. To what extent the NDB can contribute to that is to be seen. Financing projects is okay, but then it should, as I said, be also use its capacity to influence governments in terms of trying to adapt domestic legislations and the use of financing projects, the policy of financing projects in domestic currencies help a lot in our countries. That's very much this is my view, the tripod, the three major constraints that we have in terms of very needed process of attracting private capital in financing large projects.
Thank you. Thank you. Ye, would you like to tell us your thoughts on what should be some of the critically important issues that need to be factored into the strategy of lending to private players? So if it is private players who are taking on debt and in its future strategy, NDB is planning to lend to private players, then, the kinds of standards of disclosure, safeguard assessments, monitoring of carbon emissions, and what, in your view, are the main challenges and the factors that need to go into this strategy?
Thank you, Ila, for your great question. I think this is a key to the NDB's future strategy. It's also a trend of the whole NDB system, I think, but it's also is indeed a challenge. Professor Bauman has already covered very broad challenges. Just to add that, I think for the NDB, why the infrastructure financing is difficult to mobilize. Something that is not for the NDB probably not easy to overcome by itself. That is the economic volatility of the emerging economies, including BRICS countries, India, Brazil, South Africa, and I think they all suffer a lot in the COVID-19. And in that environment, I think the value of NDB is particularly even more important. I think the key is for it to innovate in more credit enhancement mechanism, as I think one of our previous speakers has mentioned. And the credit enhancement includes a guarantee, but I think fundamentally, I still want to strengthen the project preparation. That's why the reason of the lack of project. I think it needs to be additional to the commercial resources, but also it needs to control the risks. So it needs to keep the financial sustainability for itself for the NDB. So it really needs sound project preparation, and also it should I think to work together with the other concessional loan windows with other, so such as the bilateral. I think that the bilateral instruments such as the ODA, I think it can be leveraged together to reduce the risk for the NDB and also for the projects.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ye, for your comments. I have a question for Dr. Barwa now. In terms of the higher costs that need to be paid for climate resilient and disaster resilient infrastructure, which is of course part of the SDGs, are there resources that are available from the private sector in your country, and would you think that it would be good if this strategy of NDB lending to private players as well goes through, or should it be sticking to the state and lending to the state and state-owned enterprises only? What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you very much for this question. I think with as much as we are talking about catalyzing, the private sector, kind of helping hand in some of the infrastructure project of the SDGs, we should understand currently where we are in this difficult situation, which is been ravaged by the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, such that now economies are ailing and the business is affected and so on. But there are some pockets of funds that can be drawn, and that's why it is very important. Like in South Africa, we have a development bank of Southern Africa, which of course what the modality, financial modalities could be a government, entering into, memorandum of understanding, because the main thing which I raised is these inflexible, lending requirements, which need to be relaxed a bit so that you can able to allow a flexible approach, but that should be informed by a proper banking protocols and proper memorandum of understanding, so that there should be easy flow of the funding support. And we are saying that these SDGs, they are just too many, but we can just identify one or two that are very critical and fundamental to transform the lives in the community. So the private sector and also the national banks and the regional banks can be harmonized and catalyzed through understanding, so that they can able to come into the space. Because I believe they also have some money that they can contribute to the SDGs.
Professor Irina, thank you for your very interesting presentation. I had a question for you, and that is that significant progress has been made in developing technology such as what you presented, and in innovation that can transform the way infrastructure is designed and is being implemented. You talked about hydrogen and energy. Now, how successful has the NDB been in capitalizing upon these breakthroughs and to acquire greater gains in terms of SDGs through its lending activities? And how do you think the bank can further exploit this potential?
Thank you very much for your question. It is really very important, especially as we are in the period of surviving just after the pandemic situation. As far as the idea of hydrogen itself and the NDB participation with all that, I can say that actually NDB makes a lot in financing the production of blue climate neutral energy, but it's only one type of production of hydrogen, for example, the future source of global energy. That is why there is a way for better activity with participation of the partners, governments, banks for development, and as you have mentioned, it is quite necessary to attract the private institutions into this activity. And within the period that we are surviving, the public-private partnership with participation of governmental institutions is extremely important for our member countries and the entities, because only governments can afford just preferential schemes for finances for those who are interested in participation of any project. And that refers to NDB and to other banks for development. Any bank for development just can not only just afford funds for participants of the projects within financing and using different mechanisms of financing of the project, but there are some fiscal preferentials that the governments also affords, and there are different kind of support, just risk management, consultations, and so on and so forth. That is actually the question. I know for sure that there is one type of activity for for New Development Bank within national programs is just the technology transfer, the innovative technology transfer, the financial technologies transfer. But actually, it is just backed by private sector activity, and it is not successful as much as it can be, because only with the support of our governments, just within the frame of the project that I have suggested, it's the long-term project, just and any other projects, just the support of public institutions for the technology transfer in the name of the governments is very important also. And that is also the participation and the support of private institutions, because just the general idea of private entity is just to gain just funds, to gain profit. And within the preferential schemes, within the schemes of usage national currencies, and as it was mentioned, and the support of the usage of national currencies within the just possibilities that the currency exchange can afford, it will just contribute to the mutual development of private and public institutions within the implementation of the projects. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Pratibha, may I turn to you now? You've seen India have a lot of infrastructure development through public-private partnerships, even though the model has been changing. But, you know, a lot of the need for financing is now being met by private players stepping in with their equity and raising debt. Do you think that the NDB will face significant challenges, particularly in terms of how it monitors, say, carbon emissions, or how it ensures that the money that is lent to private players in India, particularly, I mean, since you are here representing India. So in that context, what are the kind of challenges that NDB is likely to face when it does lend for sustainable infrastructure in a country like India?
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this question. I just to I think in my view, the challenges that they face in terms of sort of building capacity, like in case of as I have already mentioned, that there should be a fruitful relationship with the financial intermediaries and national governments and financial institutions. So this is important to and critical for peer learning and knowledge sharing and technical support in or as well as in thorough impact assessment sort of so that viability of the project is as would be clear in terms of that. And there should be some technical assistant to the capacity of the local, like localization. If you select the projects, that localization strategy, the bottom approach has to be taken up, and there's a need to do a technical assistance to enhance the capacity of municipalities and strengthen their financings in order to increase their access to finance. This is, I think, they should strategize, NDB should strategize, like in terms of the challenge.
Let me now turn to the big challenge now, which is the economies of our countries post COVID-19. I mean, not that COVID-19 has ended; we are still in the midst of the pandemic, but the challenges that this has given rise to. You know, if you think of the cost of climate resilient and sustainable infrastructure, then it is already, estimates suggest that between 6 to 10% higher than than otherwise. So already, the challenges of raising those finances was high. After COVID, when government finances are getting squeezed, private finances are getting squeezed, what are the kind of challenges in addition to what was already there that, the world faces and our countries, the BRICS countries face, and what is the role that NDB can play to have remedial measures, mitigative measures, adaptive measures, and how can it help countries cope with these challenges as the pandemic emerges? Dr. Bauman, can we start with your views, please?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. I think it's a hard question to answer when we are still in the middle of a process. And this is a process with very peculiar characteristics. One, the fiscal involvement, as has been mentioned time and again here. Two, the problems that productive chains are facing in terms of the difficulties to get access to a number of inputs. This is something that has become a structural issue. Third, the concern with regard to climate change. What just has happened in California with the fires, in Germany and Belgium with the floods, and so on and so forth. To my view, that has brought the climate issue upwards in the policy agenda. And then you come to the point of how to make this agenda greenish, or the infrastructure more greenish in the way that Dr. Irina was mentioning, new technologies and so on and so forth. So out of that, out of all these new issues, plus the difficulties that I mentioned in my previous interventions of mobilizing private capital and so on and so forth, to suggest a specific course of action for the NDB, I think is very much challenging. And then I think the safest thing to do, safest approach, is to go step by step. What do we know right now? And that has to do with all the issues that have been mentioned so far, the difficulties in dealing with project elaboration, difficulties in dealing with mismatch of exchange rates, difficulties in dealing with public financing with infrastructure projects, domestic public financing, the difficulties in making PPPs work efficiently, etc. But you have a bigger umbrella in all that, which is the 2030 agenda, the 17 SDGs, which, to my view, would be helpful in terms of suggesting an institution like the NDB just to pursue as many SDGs as possible. That's the idea of my presentation from the very beginning, and try to tackle with some quasi-social issues like environmental, health, education, technology transfer, and so on. Keeping in mind that the challenges to come are bigger than what can be forecast right now in terms of solving the issue of productive constraints and the limitation in the access to inputs, solving the climate issues, and so on and so forth. So, in summary, what I mean is that let's go step by step. Let's and go for the safest way to deal with what we know right now, and probably that would lead us to a safer space than what we have right now.
Dr. Barwa, how much do you agree with this assessment? I'm sure you have something to add. You were talking about some of these issues earlier.
Yeah, no, I do agree, not disagree, and also just to recognize the socio-economic conditions in different countries are not the same. I'm just also talking in South Africa on the African continent. Issues of inequalities are still very prevalent. And as a result, when you're talking, climate change, that become very disruptive if we can have such kind of exposures. And at the end of the day, the people on the ground, I'm talking about the grassroots, are the most hardest hit, even in terms of this outbreak. So I would say that we should also open another window of civil societies to also come in the mix, not necessarily coming with money, but as the drivers of social change to also be funded and become agent to transform the lives of the community on the ground. Because if that is not cushioned, the communities who are impatient, frustrated by these psychosocial issues that has been referred to, we then need to harness more energies from different players, the private sector and the civil society. And I think the other point I want to bring in the mix is to reintroduce the debate about the dollar dominance in the BRICS community. I know it's a very complex issue which comes with a lot of things to talk about, but it's just to begin to start the conversation again about the de-dollarization, of our markets in the BRICS community. I think that can also go a long way in trying to restore the ailing economies that I imagine.
Dr. Ye, do you want to comment on what are the kind of measures that the bank can adopt in addition to what you had said earlier about the the preparation of grants and so on, in order to be able to cope with the challenges of the pandemic as it is unfolding?
Thank you for your extra question about the role of the NDB. I think it's a broad challenge, not only for BRICS but also for all the world. But I do want to stress that the role of NDB, the New Development Bank, probably should be more about the middle income countries. When we talk about actually the G20 has reached agreement on the debt suspension initiative for the poorest countries, and but for the middle income countries, there's no specific global commitment. So that's where the MDB should work more on. And the new development bank, I think, is exactly serving the middle income countries. Actually, as I said in the beginning, it's a bit odd. It's a bit actually it's a strange that originally the MDBs should focus on the long term financing. So, but due to the shortage, the lack of the global financial safety net, actually the MDBs are filling up the gaps of the crisis management. So that's what we see. I think that's so. And how should they do better? I think just two quick points for the new development bank and also others as well. The first is to maximize their balance sheet. Because MDBs they are part of the public sector. When the crisis comes, all the private sectors, they are more per cycle. So at this moment, the public sector should do more, and the MDBs are part of them to do that. And the second point, I think, is that the NDB should work on how to diversify its instruments, its financial instruments. Why I said that? Because the developing world is actually they are seeing rising debt, external debt especially. They are very costly. As the exchange rate is very volatile. So how to diversify instrument? I think on this one, the NDB is quite, is actually has done quite significant work on use of the local currency. I think they should do more on this one, because the exchange rate is most important. It is is the biggest cost actually for their debt. So on this way, I think probably in addition to the local currency use, the NDB could also use more equity to use less debt for the BRICS countries to accumulate less debt. I think Brazil, South Africa also are all very concerned about their debt. So I want to apologize that I mispronounced the Dr. Nevis in my previous comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Pratibha, you spoke about how financing of healthcare is a small proportion of NDB's portfolio. Now, do you think that it can use innovative financial instruments, leverage, or it can focus on providing healthcare, particularly since that has become so important after the pandemic? And what are the kind of instruments that can be used?
Yes, hello. Yes, I think the point of mine that instrument that banks should focus on at this point of time is to how they use the new digital technology in their funding mechanism, as well as there should be this BRICS should have a their own private payment system of their own. Yes, so that it can reduce the financing cost, as well as that BRICS should emphasize to establish their own local currency bond funds, which we are emphasizing for a long time, but still is in the operational is not being operationalized yet. So I think, and in terms of other tools of is like I said that local currency use of local currency is has to be that NDB has committed. They should stick with that, and they should not backslide like the other developed countries are doing in terms of ODA. So this is the fun. Thank you.
Professor Irina, in terms of talking about local currency bonds, since a lot of people are referring to that, one of the difficulties that we see in the BRICS as well as in other countries when they try to come together is that while we all want local currency bonds, but we don't like to hold other countries' local currency bonds because of the high currency risks. So we typically end up, we are comfortable with holding dollar bonds, while we of course want that our borrowing should be in local currency. Do you see a way forward on this issue? Because it's an important issue and almost all speakers have raised this issue in this context today.
First of all, I would like to thank you for your relevant and keen questions. It contributes greatly to our discussion. And first of all, I would like to support the proposal of my colleagues just to use our national currencies within the trade relations and economic relations of our countries, because dollar at the moment is extremely risky. But any country uses any currency it prefers within the external affairs, external economic relations. But as far as BRICS relations are concerned and the possibility of further preferentials, we can sit together and agree on the usage of our national currencies, because it's nothing else but the agreement between the parties concerning the usage of the currencies. I can mention you the experience of the European Union when they invented and tried to introduce euro. They suggested to the country members to use euro as the main currency of their contracts. It's just the agreement between the parties. And as far as the acceleration of the activity of the NDB and the relationship between the private and the public institutions, I will probably mention, if possible, if you allow me, the following things: that the disastrous period that we are surviving at the moment just brought our countries to difficult financial situations and economic situations, and a lot of citizens, they lost their jobs, and it's the question of the support. It means that New Development Bank, as other banks for development, should not forget about private entities, small and medium business, and within the projects find just a way of small and medium enterprises through the center of the technology transfer and through their support by issuing guarantees of just participating in the large projects with a different scale for private small enterprises to help them to survive. And just the project that I have suggested today gives way for the cooperation on private and public entities in different spheres, and will help also us not only to solve the question of the future energy resource and avoid pollution, but also just to create new activity for entities, either it's private or public. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. We've had a very interesting discussion, and I think a lot of very, very important issues have emerged from this. Going forward, the NDB is now going to have to chart out strategies on how it engages with the private sector while keeping in mind all the difficult issues that we've talked about in terms of monitoring, in terms of engaging with the private sector while prioritizing what countries need, keeping in mind their social and economic agenda. I hope that this discussion will be useful as an input for policymakers. And thank you very much to the audience. Thank you very much to the speakers and to the organizers for organizing this.
And thank you very much to all those who just prepared, carried out, and will finalize the results of our session. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much to all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, speakers, for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
your
you for
time.
joining.
Thank you.